All right. If you went to visit a mechanic and you asked him, do you know how a car works? And he said, no. Okay. If you asked him, could you take that car apart and put it back together again? And he said, no. All right. And then what if you showed him your car and said, my car is not working, can you fix it? And he says, no. Not a very good mechanic, right? Now, ignoring mechanics for a second, what if I asked you, not a mechanic, what if I asked you if you could put this car back together again? No chance, right? It's a struggle enough to put together an IKEA wardrobe. Absolutely no chance. But what if you had taken this car apart? You'd have a little bit more of a chance putting it back together again. And what if you had taken this car apart several times? And what if you had taken lots of cars apart? You'd have a much better chance of being able to put them together. In an interview with Joe Rogan, Mike Tyson was asked which of the great boxers he studied. And his answer was all of them. He had this old coach who had this old vault filled with VHS or Betamax or whatever it was at the time. And he studied all of the great boxers and he studied their moves. And he, sorry, just something popped on the screen. He studied their moves and he practiced all their moves and then eventually developed some of his own and became arguably the greatest boxer that ever lived. And Jimi Hendrix was exactly the same. Jimi Hendrix used to study all the old blues guitarists and they all had their own little tricks, their slides and the way they played it. He studied them all and then he invented his own and then he became one of the world's greatest guitarists. But it's a little bit harder for us. I mean, not harder than becoming as good as Jimi Hendrix, but if we look at pieces like this and pieces like this, some very successful content have gone around our industry, you can't see the moves that they made to come up with them. All you can see is the finished piece. So how can you take these pieces apart when you can't see the moves that they're making? So we got to do a little bit of detective work. This is a scene from True Detective, in case you don't know it. And if you haven't seen it, go and watch season 1 right now. Not right now, but soon. I was actually thinking about this, and I was thinking, who would be my spirit animal detective? You might be tempted to go with like Sherlock, or maybe you'd go with Idris. But I think if I'm honest, maybe Rust is a little bit more my spirit animal. So we're going to do a little bit of detective work here, okay? So as Lisa mentioned, I kind of built the creative team at Distilled. I left Distilled about 4 years ago to start my own training and consultancy practice, where now I just train teams and brands and agencies how to come up with creative content ideas. But during my time at Distilled, me and the team there were responsible for a lot of creative pieces that you would have seen. Lisa mentioned that in the lead up to this. And yeah, you might recognize some of these. I'm not going to be talking about them today. I'm going to be talking about some other pieces of content that other people have made for a change, which is nice. But when I left Distilled, I spent some time looking back over all the content I've been involved in. And that and it generated over 14,000 link and root domains. And I wanted to dig into these ideas and figure out, how did we get there? How exactly did we come up with them? And I realized there's usually 4 different starting points. There's the data, the format, topic, or research. I'm going to really quickly explain each of these. I'm not going to go into detail on these particular pieces. I just want you to get this idea of the different starting points. And then we can use them to spot patterns in our detective work. All right. So if you started with the data, we did a piece for a tech client. They were a fintech, finance and tech. So the Fortune 500 data set sprung to mind. So we went there and we started brainstorming ideas. What could we do? What would people be interested in seeing here? And we came up with this idea that we could show how much money the different tech companies made every second. So you can see how much revenue and profit Apple and Google and Amazon, etc. make. So that's an example of starting with the data. Okay, or you could start with the format. Anyone who's seen me speak before will definitely have seen me speak about this. I did not make this piece, I just love it. I think it's the best static infographic ever made, possibly. Maybe not, but it's one of my favorites. Sharks kill 12 people per year. This is how many people, this is how many sharks, this is how many, let me get this right. Sharks kill 12 people per year. This is how many sharks people kill per hour. And this thing scrolls and scrolls and scrolls. I'm just going to jump straight to the chase. It is, oh, ridiculous, right? Like shocking. And that's the thing that I love about this. It makes one simple point. It's actually a really powerful use of the long static infographic for once, not just because it fits in a blog. And it's pretty emotive. So I have a swipe file filled of inspiring content that I always reference when I want to come up with ideas. I was working for a client in music, or they were creating content around music. I looked at this and thought, what could we do in music? What is something small that has an equivalent that is really large? And that's how we came up with the idea of showing how many records an iPod holds. And so on this piece, you can click on it and it zooms and zooms, and it's a similarly long stack of records. That's pretty cool. But that's an example of starting with the format. Or you could start with the topic. Again, we're working with this client that was creating content about music. This was our developer, Joe, that came up with this one. And after I left the still, I kind of contacted her and I was like, how did you come up with this? And she just sat down with a pen and paper and she was thinking, right, when I think about music, what do I think about? I think about music exams, and apparently there was a rhythm test in the music exams Joe used to take. And she'd always done very well at this, and she thought, I wonder how I compare to other people. And that's how she came up with the idea, and we created this piece called Got Rhythm, where there's a drum beat and it tests how good you are in keeping rhythm. So that's an example of starting with the topic. And then of course there's research. We had a client that wanted to get in front of tech startups. So a natural place to go to was TechCrunch to see what everyone was talking about. One of the things they talk about in the tech startup world all the time is acquisitions. I screenshotted this yesterday. Apparently Just Eat is going to acquire Grubhub. This is a very common topic of conversation in TechCrunch, in the tech space. So having seen this, I wondered if anyone had created a piece that showed all the different companies that Apple and Amazon and Google had acquired and for how much. And we created this piece that shows that. And that's an example of doing it via research. Okay, so I'm having a little bit of trouble with the slides clicking forward. Okay, so these are our 4 starting points: data, format, topic, and research. So back to our detective work. So I wanted to go and look at some other pieces of content out there in the wild and start to see if I could break them down, even if I don't know how they did it. I can start to figure out the moves they might have made to get there. So there's this piece which was created by Verve called Insta Wealth, and in it they show how much money different influencers have made. But different influencers have made by selling advertising products on Instagram. And you can see Cristiano Ronaldo along there looking fairly smug. I guess I would be too if I had $40 million. You can buy a lot of hair gel for $40 million. So back to our investigative work. And I really want you to see the high quality animation here. You ready? Whoop. Investigation. Detective work. Okay, I'm being a bit facetious, but actually I do have a more serious point here. I started out with this and I was thinking, I'll just look at the piece and then I'll think about how they might have got there. And then when I started looking at it in detail, I realized, like any good detective, that there are clues. So I clicked on the information box and we got to this, another clue: Hopper HQ's Instagram rich list. All right, what's this? And so this takes you over to this Instagram rich list. Now this piece only shows you how much these people charge per post. It doesn't show you how much money they make overall. So which was the value that Verve brought to this. This was the opportunity that they saw when they discovered this. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. All I know is that this was an important part of the puzzle. So where did we go from here? Actually, I'm going to back up a second because you might be thinking, oh, how did they even know they were starting with influencers? This was for a bingo client. And bingo is essentially bingo's a form of entertainment. You might like carelessly label it as gambling, but that's not really how people think about it. It's not really how it fits into their lives. It's a form of entertainment. And also the audience that these people are going after, that they want to get in front of, enjoy reading kind of entertainment magazines, gossip mags, that type of stuff. And so if you look at those kind of publications, they're talking about celebrity, and it's a short jump from celebrity to influencers. So that's how the verb might have descended upon this topic. I have spoken to them since then to find out how they came up with these things. But starting where I was trying to do this investigative work, first of all, I've got to think, how did they even get to the topic of influencers? And then from there, we've got to think about how do we piece the rest of it together. So I was going to make just one guess about how they came up with this, but then I realized it's my game, my rules. I'm going to make as many guesses as I like. So I actually thought, what if I could think about all 4 paths to this idea? If I do that, there's a pretty good chance I might be right. Actually, being right isn't the point here, but I'm going to come back to that. So let's suppose they started with data. How could they have done that? Well, it's feasible that they went online and they knew they were looking for influencers, looked up influencer data. It didn't come up immediately in my search, but actually that's a core point of doing this type of work, is that you're prepared to go further and dig deeper and see what you can unearth. So possibly they could have done that. That could have led them to this piece. Wasn't too convinced that was the route though. Okay, format. This was probably my favorite theory or hypothesis for this one. Remember, I have a swipe file of successful content that I've seen out in the wild that I collect and I reference. I also obviously store some of my own successful campaigns in there. So thinking about Verve and thinking about stuff they might have known and might have seen, well, they've definitely seen this, they made this. But one of their most successful campaigns was this piece called Billionaires League, where they took the rich list of all the billionaires in the world, and then they broke it down by loads of different factors to see how many men and women there were, to see if it's getting old, if the list is getting older or younger, to find out how many are self-made wealth and where they came from, and did these huge pieces, this big piece of analysis to break up loads of stories. But the point here is they know that this works, the Billionaires League worked. So it's feasible that they looked at that and thought, hey, what if we did something similar for influencers? So that was kind of my favorite hypothesis. There's the topic itself. Now we've kind of already covered this a little bit. Entertainment, celebrity, influencers, and there from there, you start to kind of generate questions. What would you be interested in knowing? That's a kind of question that creative people in this field are always asking themselves. What's the thing they haven't told me? Just like that piece, the piece we're talking about, you know, where they've shown us how much the influencers charge per post, but they haven't shown us how much they earn overall. Always asking questions. We're going to come back to that. That's a key pattern. But influencers, how much money do they make? So they could have easily done this without going out online, a bit like Joe did with the rhythm game. So possible, could have done it this way. And then research. Yeah, I mean, if they decided to look for influencers, I jumped on Google News, put in influencers. I only needed to go to page 3 to find the topic to find an article about how much they earn. So that is definitely possible. So which one was it? Well, that's kind of not the point of the game. The point of the game is for you to practice thinking about how you could have got there. I realized actually when I was coming up with my answers, I couldn't necessarily predict how they could have got there. All I could do is guess, how could I have got there? And when you're doing this is like mental rehearsal. You're laying down new pathways in your mind, new pathways in your brain about ways that you could get to ideas. And the more that you lay down these pathways, the more that you will have the possibility of coming up with these ideas yourself. So that's actually the point of the game. However, I did think it would actually be fun to go out and speak to people who had made some of these creative campaigns. So I spoke to these 9 people. We have Shannon and Sam from Era, Danny and Giselle from Neomam, James and James from Verve, James and Olivia from Digital Loft, and we have Carrie from Rise at 7. And so I spoke to 9 content creators from 5 agencies about 25 different campaigns. Now, I'm not going to be able to tell you about all 25 today. I had an absolute blast in these calls. There was so much content I wanted to share, but had to boil it down. However, I'm going to tell you a bit later about how you can get access to more of this. And another point that I should make here is that although I spoke to 9 content creators, all of them, when telling me their stories about these ideas, were at pains to point out the different people involved in their team. So it extended way beyond these 9 people. For the sake of brevity and simplicity, I won't be mentioning all the different names, but I want to point out that they did mention them, and it really was a team effort, and these ideas could come from anywhere. So I'm just going to talk generally about my conversations with them. It wasn't like they did this in isolation, and some of the pieces would have had input from other people as well. All right, but the thing I wanted to ask them was, how did they come up with these ideas? So there's, okay, profanity on film. This has been a big success recently for Verve. This was, they came up with an idea, well, digging into it. Actually, I wanted to come up with my own little theory again to play the game and then see if I was right. I know I said it wasn't the point of the game, but it's fun to be right. So digging into it, it's a piece about the most foul-mouthed films, the films that have the most swearing. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Wolf of Wall Street comes up top. But then which actors swear the most in their films? Which is another thing they did, and that was Jonah Hill, which was a little bit more surprising. And that's an important point. We're going to come back to that, but that was a theme throughout a lot of these successful pieces. James Barnes from Verve kind of said to me, they always look for something to be surprising. So if we were to ask you, I thought you had a nice way of framing it. If we were to ask you who you thought would top this list, people would probably guess Samuel L. Jackson. It was quite well known that he swore a lot in his films. So the fact that it was Jonah, when they did the calculations, it turned out to be Jonah Hill. This gave them the kind of sense that, oh, we're on to something here. This is surprising. This is going to catch people's attention. So my theory on this one, I honestly, I thought I had this one. I was feeling very smug with myself. I guess I've given it away there that I didn't get it right. But again, I knew that Verve had this huge success with Director's Cut. If you've been in our industry for the last couple of years, you'll definitely have seen this. And they did a piece that showed which movies have the most deaths. And so I thought, okay, maybe they were looking back at that and thought, this did well. What else could we do? And so to get the answer to that question, you could, of course, generate your own answers, or you could go out and do some research. So I jumped on, following my hypothesis, I jumped on Google search, which movie has the most, and boom, there it is. Which movie has the most swear words and which movie has the most F words? You know, interestingly, in the same list, they also have which movie has the most kills. So I really thought I had it, but actually it was a different route. Speaking to the guys, James Finlayson was telling me that he'd seen this piece on pudding. If any of you don't know pudding, you should go and check out all their stuff. They make amazing data-driven content. I'm sure you've seen some of it. But they did this piece that broke down the dialogue in Disney movies and looked at how many words and how many lines were spoken by male and female characters. And the thing that caught James's attention most about this was the way that they gathered the data. And they actually went into depth on this post, the original post, about how they came up with that data. They had scraped all these, I think it was like forums and databases that had these movie screenplays up there. And then you could scrape them and analyze all the language that was used. So they brought this to the table in their brainstorm and said, there's more we could do here. We could get this data. What would be interesting to know? So they bounced things back and forth for a while until somebody came up with the idea of doing swearing. And then once they hit it, as soon as that came up, they were a bit like the Jonah Hill thing. As soon as the swearing thing came up, they're like, yeah, that's it. That'll work for sure. And not only that, James Barnes mentioned that he remembered seeing pieces of content go around about the Wolf of Wall Street having the most swears or the most F words ever. Actually discovered it's in the Guinness Book of Records. And there was a similar thing about Uncut Gems. So this actually told him a couple of things. It told him, actually, I might be getting ahead of myself, I'll do it now, yeah. So I want to actually break down the steps here, because there's some pattern. If we lay it out like this, there's some patterns amongst this that we can begin to detect, and not only detect how they personally came up with these individual ideas, but what other activities, what habits and traits are they displaying that we could borrow from so that we can come up with our own ideas. So they remembered this piece about the language in films. They asked the question, what else could we do? They had a discussion to generate these ideas. And then they came up with swearing. They remembered that these pieces about Wolf of Wall Street and Uncut Gems, that told them a couple of things. That told them that this is a popular topic of conversation, so they were onto something. But it also told them if they wanted a new angle, they'd have to come up with something else. And that's something that these guys and everyone that I spoke to is always thinking about. It's like, what's the new angle here? We don't want to just replicate what's been done. So we wondered, what new angle could we bring? And that's how they came up with it. How else could we break down movies other than by the movie itself, by male and female? You could break it down by individual characters and individual actors, and they actually did both of that. And actually, I just wanted to point out here, remembering and wondering are two things that creative content creators do a lot, and I'm going to dig into that a bit more shortly. But when you do pose these questions, what else could we do? What new angles could we bring? There's a variety of ways you can answer those things. They'll either be answered by something they remember seeing. They'll be answered by generating ideas on their own. They will be answered by imagining what they could possibly do, or they will be generated in a discussion or by going online and doing research. Those are the 5 kind of activities, the ways in which these content creators go about answering these questions. I noticed these came up time and time again. So it's like memory, imagination, generating options, kind of the same thing actually, discussion, and going online and researching. All right, so skipping on to another one. We're going to come back to that and pull out the patterns, but it's easier to pull out the patterns once you've seen a few. So let's move on to this piece, Future Gamer by Rise at 7. This guy over here is a model that represents what would happen to an online gamer if they continued to game all day and didn't do anything to correct it, or potentially what we're all going to look like after lockdown. So I had another theory on this one. I was feeling pretty good about this one, and it was close. I kind of give myself half marks for this one. I know I am going against the point that it isn't the point to get it right, but I'm competitive. I always want to get it right. It's a fun game. But my theory on this one was, I remember seeing this piece. Again, remember, it's an important part of this. I remembered seeing this piece that said that doctors were beginning to detect growths on people's skulls, at the base of the skull, where they've got their head folded forward from using their mobile phone too much. And then I remembered another piece that came out, which I thought was about what are going to be the effects if we continue to use our mobile phone. But I actually misremembered this one a little. That's not exactly what this one was showing. But this did come into it. It's interesting. I remember seeing this, and Carrie remembered seeing this, and that it did play a role in the idea itself. Similarly, that piece that James used as inspiration for the screenplays one, I also remember seeing that. I didn't think about it in that particular instance, but I remember seeing that. So it's like curious that we all remember seeing similar things, and that we remember seeing lots of campaigns. I'm giving you a hint on the points we're going to draw out of this. I'm sure you're getting them. All right, so here's how Carrie and the team actually came up with this one. Carrie's sister a while back had tagged her in an article about PlayStation Thumb. It was a bit of a joke because apparently her nephew plays a game like PlayStation or whatever all day long. So it's something that she tagged in and she remembered seeing, and it had resonated with her. And then she also remembered seeing this piece, which actually wasn't about mobile phones. It's about your potential work colleague of the future. This is what will happen if we all stay hunched over our desk all day long. And they asked a bunch of experts, what would happen if we don't do anything to correct this? So having seen this piece and knowing that the data within it came from speaking to experts about what would happen, Carrie decided to go on the World Health Organization and search for an expert that could potentially comment on the effects of sitting for too long, the effects of playing games for too long. And actually in doing that, she stumbled upon this article or entry in the World Health Organization, which says that gaming disorder is actually a thing. And then if you dig into that and you look at some other papers, there's loads of physical conditions that come with this. So now they have their data and it's like, it's scientifically backed. Amazing. So to do what we did with the other piece, just to spell this out a bit, I'll point out that these stories these are the simplified version, of course, you know, and it certainly doesn't mention all the other things that were brought to mind, the other questions they asked, the other possible answers they generated, the other things they saw in their research. You know, to come up with ideas, you have to kind of go all over the place. And then eventually there's these points, these elements that connect up and combine to create the idea. So it's a simplified version, but it's much easier for us in order to kind of see how they got there. And Steve Jobs actually does this really great talk in his Stanford address about only looking backwards, can you join the dots? All right, so getting back to this one, Carrie remembered seeing this article about gaming, about online gaming, actually PlayStation Thumb. That was the condition. She remembered seeing this piece about Emma, the office worker of the future. She wondered, what if we could do that for online gaming? She researched the World Health Organization, discovered gaming disorder, and from there she had it all. Okay, so whilst I was speaking to these guys, I thought I'd ask them, what makes an idea work? What is it, like when you come up with these ideas, what gives you the confidence that it's going to be good, that it's going to get picked up? And again, there were similar patterns in the answers that they gave me. I'll just jump straight to the answer here, or these are the 5 criteria I noticed coming up a lot. It reveals something new, it's surprising, it's on a popular topic of conversation, it can generate clickable headlines, and it has broad appeal. Particularly by that, I mean, and they mean, it can appeal to a number of different publishing niches. You're not just targeting one niche of publisher. So I'll give you a few examples of this. The guys at Digital Loft were brainstorming around ideas for a company that have children, that make children's toys. So they think children's toys, thinking about the larger category, that's children's entertainment. And then they knew that Disney was a popular theme. They'd seen lots of articles. Again, they'd even created some of their own content about Disney that done well. And so they were sitting around asking, what else could we do about Disney? And then Olivia, I think it was, I hope I'm attributing it correctly, said, wouldn't it be funny? She said, I wonder how many children get named after Disney characters. And the interesting thing here is they didn't think it would be much, but they went ahead and looked anyway. Rather than just dismissing it, they took the next step anyway, just to see. They went ahead and they were really surprised. They told me that, like, it was expressed in the way they said it. It was really surprising when they saw it. So they thought, yeah, this is, so they, again, here it's surprising and it's on a popular topic, Disney. And they know it's a popular topic because they've been keeping their eye on different articles and seeing loads about this. So, and then in another piece they did about they came up with an idea to do the rich list for pets. And during this, once they have the idea and they think it might be quite good, they start generating headlines. And again, I think it was Olivia, I hope we're getting this right because I don't want to offend anyone else in the team. But she was like, wouldn't it be, so they've come up with this idea to show the world's richest pets. This actually was inspired, say, by the stuff all about billionaires. Digital Loft have done a piece on billionaires, so have Vera, so have Verb. It's a popular topic and they're all looking for new angles. And this one actually started as a joke where James was like, it'd be funny if we could do the rich list for pets. And again, even though it wasn't that serious, they thought, oh, let's look into it anyway. This is a key attribute again, just taking it further, even if you're not sure. And then Olivia, at some point, when they start to think about how would this become a clickable headline? You know, you could just say something about the richest pets and that's not bad, but how do you make it even more clickable? And so Olivia said, wouldn't it be fun if we could show that these pets were richer, or these animals were richer than certain celebrities? And they managed to show that there was a chicken that's actually richer than Gigi Hadid, who was all over the news at the time. So it's a clickable headline. That's what they were looking for. And actually, to get this, they spend time generating lots of headlines, and then they sent them around the team. I thought this was really cool, and just said, would you click on this? Would you be drawn to this? Would you look at this if it came up in your feed? And people were like, yeah, for sure. Nice little quick way of testing it. So Danny and Giselle and Neomam were working, they were looking at, they discovered a piece on NPR about the most popular names in every state over time. And it had this cool animated map, and it was really interesting. They liked the topic, they liked the execution. They're like, again, we need a new angle. What's new that we can bring to this? So Giselle, after a bit of brainstorming and discussion, Giselle remembered or knew that, that gender neutral names were a popular topic. And they knew that this was a new angle. And the thing that they also liked about this was that this was something they expressed, was that it opened up new publishers. It's not just publishers that talk about baby names that will write about this. This is a much larger social trend and social conversation, so it opens up much more. The guys at Digital Loft also mentioned the same when they were talking about Disney names. They realized that opens up entertainment and all kinds of other publishers. So I think, hopefully I covered them off. You show something new, surprising, and a popular topic with clickable headlines that has broad appeal. Right, what traits do these people share? Or to ask, put that another way, how could you come up with ideas like these? I realize I'm probably about to run over in time, but let's keep going. All right, one thing I noticed is they ask a lot of questions constantly. One person that really kind of epitomized this was Sam from ERA. I was speaking to Sam about this piece about millionaires per square mile. When I was doing my detective work, trying to figure out how they might have got there, I get the millionaires thing, but I wasn't sure how they got to per square mile. And Sam said she had been doing some research and she stumbled over a piece about millionaires and how many there were in each city. But the thing that sprung to mind for Sam was, like, how many are there in my city? But also, like, how likely am I to bump into them? Am I actually walking past them all the time and don't realize? And these were the kind of questions she was asking herself that led to the idea. And actually, this came into play even more so with this piece about modern Santa. They were working with a client that does logo design. So logo design, it's a short hop to branding. They wanted to do a piece around Christmas. Sam realized Santa is essentially a brand. They thought about doing the evolution of Santa, and then they looked at it, and Sam thought, he hasn't really changed all that much. Why hasn't he changed? Why hasn't he changed to keep up with modern society? Or to ask it a different way, like, how would people redesign Santa, rebrand Santa to bring him into modern times? And so I was just curious about this attitude. It was something I couldn't quite put into words. And I asked Sam, like, what is this questioning attitude? And she says she's just always, whenever she's going along and coming up with ideas, she's just always thinking about what would be an interesting question to ask. And then from there, how could we answer that question? And on the point of answering that question, these guys were noticeably always willing to push things further. So Danny, Neomam had seen this piece about the oldest company in every state. So he wondered if you could do one for every country in the world. What is the oldest company for every country in the world? And the data kind of didn't exist. There were some lists, but they weren't that good. They weren't that credible. So they decided to do the actual desk research themselves. It took a team about 2 to 3 weeks. And like at one point, Danny sort of said to me, quite exasperated, he was like, there's a reason no one's done this. So it's a lot of effort, but I often think that the bit, when you're creating a piece of content, whether it's figuring out the data or figuring out the visual or the angle, whatever it is, the bit that's hard, the bit that's a pain in the ass, that's the bit where you're adding value. And these people are always willing to push further. Like when the idea with the pet rich list, they thought it was a joke, but they took it further. The Disney thing, they didn't think the data would show anything, but they had a look. The oldest company, like loads of people would have gone, oh no, data's not available, let's leave it. But Danny and the team pushed further. This definitely was a huge team effort. and they did it, and then they got the rewards. This piece went absolutely everywhere, and it's just a beautifully simple piece. Similar, I think we've already talked about this, but just look at, you can, as well as pushing further to get the data, you can also push further to just take it that next step. And that was a phrase that James Barnes used when he spoke about things. When he saw this piece, he thinks, what's the next step? What have they not done? What could we do next? So he looked at this and thought about the angle, similar to the gender neutral baby names things, just what's the next step? And even the bit about the actors that swear the most. Just what could we do next? What haven't they done? And then similarly, you can also take the execution further. There was quite a nice exchange where I spoke to the guys at Verve, and they had mentioned that they'd created this piece about alternative architecture. Apparently this elephant on the right was an alternative proposed design for the Arc de Triomphe. And they created this piece and it did pretty well. But Neomam had actually referenced these guys in a blog about how this is taken from a Neomam blog. They saw this campaign developed by Verve Search, and it had inspired them to create content that's sort of similar, but they asked again, how could we take this further? So rather than just copying it, another part of the design that actually, another thing that influenced this idea, Danny discovered this piece in Reddit. I don't know if you can see this. This is like a glass panel beside an old ruin. So you can see what the ruin looks like, but also what it used to look like. You know, it says there, a clever way to show what ancient ruins look like. Danny thought, that's pretty cool. Could we do something similar? And so they used that to show, and here's a little GIF of the Parthenon being recreated. And then they did another piece for someone else, and this time they went to video, and they showed the rebuilding of the 7 wonders of the world. I didn't have the confidence to put a video in my slides, so I'll just show you the step-by-step. And this thing is done in this beautiful 3D, boom, 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 boom. Lovely. But they pushed and they took the idea further. All right, I'm going way over time. I don't know if Lisa or anyone's going to shout at me, but I'll keep going until someone pulls me off. I didn't mean that. I can hear my girlfriend laughing in the other room. Okay, so what other patterns are there? Remember when we spoke about the idea for a future gamer? Remember, like Carrie remembered that this article about PlayStation Thumb, and she remembered this piece about Emma, the future worker. And the guys at Verve remembered this piece by Pudding over here, and they remembered seeing articles about the films with the most swearing. So obviously the insight here isn't that they have a good memory. The insight is that they collect things. And actually they told me specifically how they do it. James from Digital Loft and James from Verve and Sam from Era, they collect lots of anything they see that's interesting. They just drop it into a file. Any article they stumble upon any time, just on social or whatever. Carrie has a very deliberate process where every day for half an hour, she goes on Google News and looks to see what studies and campaigns and interactives and maps, etc., are being shown. And by seeing all these things, they have more of the elements that they can combine to come up with ideas. Creative people are collectors and tinkerers. This is a photo from Freud's house in London. I went there and I remembered seeing this, that there's way more of these things than you can see here, but he's gathered ornaments from loads of different civilizations and tribes across the world. And I was interested to see in an article I looked up, he started doing this from the 1890s onwards. And then I looked up something else just out of interest. He started coming up with these main theories about the unconscious in the 1900s. So it wasn't just collecting statues. He was obviously collecting information from different cultures, historical cultures, different tribal cultures, different cultures around the world. And all these cultures have different beliefs and stories about that bit about ourselves we don't understand. Call it the unconscious, call it God, call it spirituality, whatever. He's collecting all these ideas and then he was able to combine them. I mentioned that creative people are also tinkerers. This was a really important invention in the history of music where it's actually, believe it or not, it doesn't look very portable, but this was the first portable recording device. The thing on top where it's kind of shining, that actually cuts a record. It spins and there's a kind of sharp edge that cuts the vinyl record. And once this was the only mobile version that had been invented at the time, so this allowed them to go around the deep south of America and do field recordings of famous blues artists and jazz musicians. And strangely, there was a whole TV series about this called American Epic, made by Jack White of the White Stripes. It was really cool. But strangely, I actually know the girl whose great-great-grandfather invented this thing. And she remembered seeing his garage, which was filled with machinery, loads of different machines that he had bought and taken apart and put together in different ways. So this is what creative people do. They take things apart and think about what else could you do with this. Creative people are like a small child. A small child walks into a new room and he runs all over the place. Ooh, what's that? What can I do with it? Whereas an adult, we get a bit boring if you're not careful. We walk in and just sit down. No, it's just a room. Same when they get a box or if they get wrapping paper. There's an age at which they're more fascinated by boxes and wrapping paper than they are by gifts, because they're still curious. They're like, what is this thing and what can I do with it? Creative people are like that.
On that note, Mark, I'm going to have to be a boring adult and rein you in because we have loads of questions.
All right, I think I could finish in about 1 minute.
Yeah, go on.
Okay, so what was I going to say? Imagine if Mike Tyson had never thrown a punch before he goes in the ring. Yeah, the work is done. The match is won for him before he even steps in the ring. It's all the work he's done before to prepare for it. Some people think that coming up with ideas is luck. Isn't it funny how these people have been talking about get lucky all the time? That's because, as they say, like fortune favors the prepared mind, or luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And the preparation that we do is collecting these content ideas. It's taking them apart again. So when you see something like this, you don't just look at it and go, oh, that's cool. You dig in and you think, what makes this work? And how could they have come up with it? And what else could we do? What's the new angle? What's surprising about this? So you do your detective work, and then you collect things and you tinker, and then you'll be able to come up with content ideas just like these people. Now, as you could see, how could you get better at this? Next steps. I'm very excited about this. There was so much more I wanted to share with you from all the stuff I talked to these guys. I couldn't boil it all down into one talk, but you can get it. I'm launching a new site today, which is all about coming up with content ideas. I'm in the process of boiling down the rest of the insights from speaking to these guys, the stories, and I will be sharing that with you, exactly how they came up with the ideas, step by step, so you can borrow from their processes and create your own wildly successful campaigns. So if you want to get that, head over to contenthubble.com right now, stick your email address in, and in about a couple of weeks, I will send you it when it's done. All right, sorry, Lou, I'm done.
Okay, right. So we are really keen to stick to time, but you have got a shitload of questions. So what I will say is that we'll ask one question and then I will pass on all your questions over to Mark and we'll get him to answer them at another time, like maybe on email, like a follow-up or something like that. Okay, is that all right, Mark?
Sure, you can also get me on Twitter at Content Hubble, which has no followers right now because I launched it today. So, be the first.
Well, Mark, there you go. Nice plug. Yeah. Okay, so let's see which question. Okay, so go on. Mark, can you tell us how you stay on top of new trends, news, campaigns? Do you have any recommendations to help people of the moment?
Yeah, I mean, some people I know are very deliberate about the people they follow online. So they follow stuff like Pudding, they follow some data journalists, but it's also good. And obviously they follow people in our industry, like, an easy starting point is digital PR examples, or to follow, there's the email thing, what's it called again? Content curated email list. But, some people do it daily, and I used to do that. I've got my social feeds and my, RSS feed, and I would go in and I deliberately curate them, and I sit and I go through them every day and I look for stuff that's interesting and I capture it. You have a scrapbook of cool angles and cool formats. I don't do that quite so regular anymore, but I think when you're starting, it's really important to do that. And actually, the guys I was talking to are still doing it every day, so that's cool. I tend to sit down every couple of weeks, maybe on a Saturday morning for a few hours, and there's certain sites I go to and I go through everything I've missed and I capture the stuff I like and I stick it in my swipe file, which is usually a Pinterest board. But actually, I need to start making one of all just articles I like. That was something I learned from chatting to these people. I don't do that, and it makes sense. I should totally do that.
Awesome. Okay, thank you so much, Mark. That was really great. Lisa, do you want to say anything?
Thanks so much, Mark. That was really awesome. It's so fascinating to see how, and also I like the detective work. And we've done that loads ourselves. We are kind of obsessed about looking at what other people are doing and how they can possibly have come up with it, but also what made it good and so on. So I think this is like one of the most important things in the creative process is like, one, see what everyone else is doing, but also care about what everyone else is doing. And I think this is one of the most unique thing about our industry is that we are very willing to share with each other of what we're doing, and that makes everyone better. It kind of is like being part of the people that shares actually makes you better as well, and I think that's so great. So thanks for everyone that's opened up and shared with Mark. I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah, massive. I meant to say that. Thank you so much to all the people that gave me all those insights and stories. So generous. Yeah. I wish I'd recorded them. We are going to redo the conversations and record them because they were so much fun.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's a great idea.